The RTÉ Rugby Podcast, sponsored by Canterbury. See the new Irish men and women's rugby jerseys at canterbury.com.
And you're very welcome along to this week's RTÉ Rugby Podcast. Neil Treacy here with you, alongside Fiona Hayes and Eddie O'Sullivan. And we were planning to go heavy on the Champions Cup final recap, Leinster losing to Rochelle at the weekend. But we do have some news this afternoon. A bit of a coaching switch up in the provinces. Dennis Leamy, it has been reported in recent weeks, but now it is official. Dennis Leamy is going back to Munster. He's linking up with Graham Roundtree's coaching ticket. He's been signed as the new defence coach on a 3-year deal. He had been working this season with Leinster as their contact skills coach, and Leinster didn't leave that vacancy too long to be filled, because within an hour or two, they confirmed as well Sean O'Brien, who only retired from playing 11 days ago. He's now back, and he back at Leinster, and he is going straight into the coaching setup. He is taking on that role as a contact skills coach under Leo Cullen's coaching ticket. So, guys, there's plenty of news this morning to get our teeth through. Eddie, I might start with you, and I might start on the Dennis Leamy news, because he's someone who you would have given his first Ireland cap to against New Zealand back in 2005. Can you tell us about what you would have seen from him down the years? Would he have always have struck you as a bit of a rugby brain, as a rugby nerd, someone who would have been getting involved in that side of things?
Well, I mean, as a player, he was outstanding, obviously, and he fought his way into probably one of the toughest departments to get into an Irish team for the last 20 years, is always the back row. He wasn't the biggest number 8 in the world in terms of his height and his bulk, but he punched way above his weight. And his smartness around the breakdown was colossal. He understood the breakdown really well. He was famous for getting over the ball, and once he got on the ball, you couldn't get him off it. He had huge arms, and he was very powerful. But that wasn't just his power. I think which was in evidence. Like, I remember once seeing him make a tackle over in Sale in a Heineken Cup game, which was ridiculous. The time the number 8 for Sale was the French number 8, Cheval, yeah. And somehow the scrum slewed around, and Cheval got past the whoever's on the flank, and he was gone up, like he was hitting straight for Rog, which was never going to be a good outcome. And somehow Leamy had one hand out and grabbed him by the collar and reeled him in, which is like extraordinary. So he had incredible power. I mean, it was I remember looking at the time and going, and I was sitting in the stand going, that's insane. And then I went back and watched, and when I had it recorded, and it was insane how we pulled Cheval back, but one hand by the collar. So incredible power. But again, he's understanding of the back row, a number 8 as well. It's one thing playing 6 or 7, but 8, you've got to be able to multitask. So yeah, I think he knows the back row stuff. He's obviously done a great job at Leinster. So it makes complete sense for Munster to get him back in the fold, because he's a Munster man at heart as well. So yeah, it's a really good signing for him. I think a good business on Munster's part for sure.
And Fiona, when the news came in, obviously just, you're checking on just double checking a few details on him. And what jumped out to me, like, he's 40 years of age. He retired in 2012. And I just had this moment this morning where I was going, hang on, he was only 30 when he retired. Like 56, 57 Ireland caps, nearly 150 games for Munster. Like, he packed a huge amount into the years he had. And he probably still had a lot more to give if it wasn't for those injuries.
Yeah, and what a phenomenal player he was for Munster. He talked about coaching him there, but I remember going up to Thomond Park watching him, and he just didn't look that big on the pitch, but every single game he got everywhere. He was everywhere around the place, big carries, got over the ball, was guaranteed a few turnovers. I think as well, it's probably one of the worst kept secrets ever, Neil. Only confirmed today. I when I saw it, I presumed it was confirmed weeks ago, because I've heard so much chatter about it. But look, he's worked his way up. He was coaching at schools level. He went to club, and obviously Leinster snapped him up, and even Josh van der Fleer talking about what he brought to him. So it's exciting time for Munster, but what a player he was, and to only be 40 years of age and to have come this far in coaching as well is really, really good. So it's exciting times ahead, I think.
And from a Munster point of view, even as well, Fiona, and speaking from your own background, as growing up opposite Thomond Park and stuff, if you were speaking as a Munster fan, to have himself, Mike Prendergast and Andy Kyriakou, 3 people who know the club quite well coming into the senior coaching team, how does that sit with you?
Oh, that's brilliant. I think it's exciting. You know, people talk about heart down in Munster all the time, talk about Thomond Park. We obviously missed a few seasons with COVID and stuff like that, but you can see it it was building up nicely. The Toulouse game, the fans up there, to have a coaching staff that understand what the fans want, but also really, really good around the game. And we saw what Prendergast has done over in France, and we see what Leamy can offer, but to have them coming back. And, you know, I've gone to a few sessions in the academy where I've watched Kiri do sessions, and he loves the club as well. So it's brilliant for Munster that they can balance that coaching experience and tactical side of the game, but also know exactly the style of rugby, the fans, and you always have to have those fans on board, especially up in Thomond Park.
And Eddie, is it a good thing also as well that while they have the Munster DNA in them, all these assistants coming in, Andy Kiriaki, Mike Prendergast and Dennis Leamy, that they've been out around the place as well, and they've sampled other coaching cultures, be it inside Ireland or outside Ireland, like Leamy with Leinster, Mike Prendergast with his years in France, and Andy Kiriakou, who's been around the place in England as well.
Yeah, look, it's always good to get out of the environment you've spent most of your time in as a player. I think it's always good. Like, for a coach to kind of stay in the same domain and coach on, it's quite hard, because you only know one way of doing things, is the way you play it, and you in that particular domain. So I think to get away, especially overseas in particular, I think Mikey Prendergast's done a hell of a trip in France, and he's got huge experience. That's a massive coming in. You'll always learn going away from home. You know, I did it myself as a coach, and I think, you know, it's a hard thing to do, because the temptation is to stay what you know, and if you can stay on where you are, it's very easy. You don't uproot your family, you don't uproot your life, but you do need to push yourself out, like, and get that experience. So the fact that they've been away and coming back, I think, is excellent. Yeah, it certainly brings new ideas and new views on things.
And for their first few months, like when they come in next season, I know obviously Graham Rowntree is the link to this season as well, but what's the approach that they have to take? Like, did they have to try completely get away from what was happening this year? Did they have to try bring in completely new ideas? Did they have to bring in a hell of a lot more discipline as well, and kind of talk about the standards that are needed? Like, they're in a tricky spot, I suppose, coming in.
Yeah, there's a reset button for Munster at the moment, you know, and no matter what happens this season with Van Graan leaving, and the whole new coaching ticket coming in, that is a reset moment. The tricky part of it is that Rowntree is there already. It's not completely new. So his honeymoon will be quite brief, I think. You know, if he's going to move Munster on, must have a pretty clear blueprint in his mind at the moment what's involved in that. And Munster do need to move on. You know, I mean, I think we've been around this block a few times this year already, and not just this podcast, but have to say that, you know, there'll have to be a lot of change very quickly. Now, the good thing is that I think the players will be in the headset for that as well. You know, everybody wants to kind of take the next step, but they won't get a season to bed in. Nor I think should they, you know. And Munster have been punching below their weight for a while. We're not saying they're the best team in Europe, but consistently they need to deliver. And in some ways, we could segue into the discussion on the weekend's games, because they're playing Ulster away, and it's a very big game for both clubs. But Munster need to make a statement next season, and it has to be early doors. So there was a lot of pressure on Rowntree. I think he knows that. He's around the game a long time, but it does add extra pressure to the new guys coming in, that there isn't a lot of time to go bedding in and settling in. They need to hit the ground running. They need to have a very clear vision of what they want. They need to get that communicated to the players. They need to energize the players around that vision. It's a tough one, because you usually get, when you come in on a new ticket like that, you usually get a little more time, but it's not a new ticket. Let's not cut ourselves. Graham Rowntree has been there. He must know what he wants, and he needs to be able to get that message across very quickly. And I think that will be different from a Van Graan did. Every coach puts a stamp on his team. So whether you like what Van Graan did or didn't do, I think Rowntree knows that it's not going to be a long honeymoon period.
Fiona, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think similar. I think obviously an area of the game where we probably will see big changes is Prendergast and, you know, attacking rugby. I think we've probably been far too conservative at times, and that's something we've seen in the Munster team. Yeah, they have slightly improved over the years, and then kind of take a step backwards again towards the end of this season. So I think it's an area we'll see. It will take time to embed that, and obviously Roundtree has worked very well with the forwards. We've seen some really good young forwards coming through, and that will keep happening. So I think these guys will get a couple of months together, but pressure will come on around Christmas time. I think when we start getting into that Heineken Cup, to actually be able to visibly see a structure and its style of play. And I definitely think that it's an area Munster attack wise will have to look at, and maybe changing up that kicking game a little bit as well.
Eddie, how important is it for a team, or it mightn't even be important, this is one for you to answer. How important or unimportant is it to have a defined style to your team, and not play the exact same every week, but just to be able to modify it week on week? Because look, one thing I would have noticed, particularly this season with Munster being on their press calls week on week, looking ahead to various games, that something the players would have said a lot is when we're asking them about the style of rugby you're playing at the moment, and something they would say is that they tend to change the way they play based on who they're playing, based on what the weather conditions are going to be like, based on whether it's going to be home or away, all these factors adding up to how they're going to play. And like, from my point of view, it's one thing having a kind of core style of rugby to your game and also being able to tweak it according to those factors. But it does seem like those factors are kind of dictating the way Munster are playing week on week, rather than having, a philosophy to themselves and an identity to their rugby.
Well, the first thing you should look at is what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are as a team. And historically, Munster, that famous Munster team that dominated the noughties, was basically probably the best pack of forwards in Europe. I mean, it was basically the Irish pack. 6 or 8 of them all at different times. So they had that capacity. And what happened to Munster in that period was they usually got to the semi-finals and the finals during those heartbreak years by just beating the snot out of people. But when you got to the final or a semi-final against a big French team, you couldn't beat the snot out of their pack. And then it came down to what you could do behind the scrum. And Munster got caught short a lot of those years. And then they made the breakthrough, with Trevor Halstead and Dougie Howlett. Those other players brought an extra edge to them. So I think they were in that mindset of having a game based on forward domination. And I think what's happened is that Munster pack dissipated, and Munster were not that force that they were in the noughties. And in the last 10 years or so, even, they haven't been able to dominate teams up front. They've been able to dominate teams in the URC or the Celtic League or that. But, when the rubber hits the road in Europe, that's when it gets tough. And I think they didn't grow their game. I think, funnily enough, Rob Penny had a vision for them to play a more New Zealand type game, which, to be fair to him, I think was not far off where they needed to move to. Now, I think maybe he tried to change too much too quickly.
Wrong man, wrong time, was it?
Yeah, and I think, to be fair to him, there was a lot in what he was trying to do, but he was probably too honest as well. And if the dogs in the street were talking about the style of rugby he wanted to play, which is probably too much information, he needs to kind of gradually move there, but he didn't bring the team with him, and it blew up in his face a bit. That was a bit unfair on him. I think he had good vision, but my point is, you need to build your philosophy around what you have and what you haven't got. It that can change. Munster went from having a dominant pack to not having the most dominant pack in Europe, and they needed to build around that, which meant developing their attacking game, and they never quite did it. And they went through phases. They went through phases where they kicked the leather off the ball. I mean, Conor Murray depended his leg from kicking box sticks, and that didn't change no matter what the weather was. So there's a bit of a flaw in that argument, and you do have to change, because the other team gives you your game plan. But you're right, you don't reinvent the wheel every week, and you can't reinvent the wheel every week. But you have to be able to change it up and change it down. And we got what we saw Munster over the years is that they used to get so far because they were good at what they did, but they could never land the silverware because at the end of the season it caught up with them. And some of that's around signings as well, who they brought in, who they brought out. So it's not as simple. There's a lot of moving parts in it. But I think Munster still have been punching below their weight, which I hate to say that as a Munster man myself and played for Munster. But I think there's more in them. And I think maybe we saw glimpses at the end of the season that there was more there. But then again, the wheels came off again when they met Leinster, which is not the end of the world. Leinster are still a very good team. So I think next year what they need is they need to set out their stall early. We need to see how Munster aim to go. And, if they fail in the process of trying to get there, people are more understanding. But I think we need to see a shift up. And Fiona's right. they need to look at their attack. They need to look at their transition game. They need to look at their kicking game. There's a lot they need to look at. And their defence, they changed their defence at the end of the season. They went to a soft drift defence. That's been really productive from. Like, they were playing up and in all year and getting destroyed at 13. So, like, they're the things that they need to get figured out. And there's a lot of stuff in it, but I don't buy into the thing that, they need 6 months to get this figured out. Like, these are all professional athletes. Be a good pre-season there now where they'll need to get their house in order and at least come out and we'll see evidence of what they're trying to do. They won't be perfect at it, but we'll be able to say after a couple of months what Munster are trying to do. Is it the right thing, is it the wrong thing, or could they do it better? I think they're all legitimate discussions. But the season isn't over yet, so we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves, maybe.
Well, that leads me nicely to the next question I was about to ask to Fiona. Eddie said the season isn't over yet, but will it be over by 10 p.m. on Saturday or on Friday night?
I don't know. We saw two very different Munster performances, haven't we, in the last two games? So if you were on the back of that Toulouse game, you'd say absolutely not. This Munster team will be able to go up to Ulster away and handle that pack. But then, having watched that Leinster game, things just didn't quite fit. Might have been a bit tired. Look, I think I heard rumours as well that maybe they had took too much time after the Toulouse game and they hadn't gone in and done their usual week's kind of prep around it. They'd done the mental prep, but not kind of the stuff on the pitch. So that could have had a big effect. Look, I think it's the same as Leinster this week. It's a chance for Munster to wipe that slate clean. They got a lot of stick after that Leinster team. People were calling it a third Leinster team. So look, it's a chance for them to do it. It's actually really interesting. When I look back at the stats from that last game up at Ulster, we know Munster came away with the win, but it was actually dominated by Ulster at times. They had 55% possession. In the meters carried, they had over 60 meters plus. They had turnovers 10 apiece. Both conceded around 13 penalties each, but it was just a far more clinical performance, I think, by Munster, and especially in that red zone, I thought they were really, really good. When they attacked kind of square and narrow under the post, they were really fixing those Ulster defenders, and it's something they'll similarly have to do. We saw the Sharks, they went from side to side the last time they played up in Ulster, and Ulster's defence was actually outstanding. Nick Timoney was unbelievable. Dwayne Vermeulen was brilliant as well. But we saw in the last maybe 15, 16 minutes that they could have lost that game as well because they imploded. But that is sheer because the Sharks changed up the way they played and really tried to attack the soft shoulder, the outside channels. So I do think that Munster will attack them physically, but they will have to get that ball into the back line and change the point of attack at times as well.
Yeah, and it's funny, Eddie, Fiona referenced the game at Kingspan Stadium between the two sides probably 4 or 5 weeks ago. And, if you were to ask someone at the time who has the upward trajectory heading into the business end of the season, you would have been thinking Munster based on the fact that they were, I say flying high, but they were motoring well in Europe. They were back into a contention for a home quarter final. Ulster, it looked like were pretty much out of contention for a home quarter final. They would have needed to win their last two games against Edinburgh and Sharks, which they've done. And now Munster, it looks like have kind of fallen off the wagon again.
Yeah, look, that's the ups and downs of it, I guess. But I think you can forget about all that happened up to now. Actually, when it comes to this game on the weekend, for me, these are watershed games for both clubs. Like, if Munster, it's a long drive home to Belfast. If Munster lose tomorrow night, it's just going to be a tough day out. Their season will just peter out with nothing. And there'll be a lot of navel gazing. But I suppose the only thing is the coach is leaving. There'll be the reset button. People look forward to next year a bit easier. Whereas if Ulster lose this one, this is another lame duck season for I hate to say it, but the biggest problem Ulster have had over the last number of years, no matter who's been coaching them actually, is that they have promised an awful lot every year to a point, and then the wheels have come off. And it's only a quarter final. You know what I mean? Like, these are Ulster and Munster are talking about silverware this year, and they're only pat the silverware now as URC. So they're under a lot of pressure, both clubs. And if Ulster lose on Friday night, it's going to be huge question marks around them. How could they end up falling out of Europe, all by this narrowest of margins, and then coming up short, not getting to the final four in the URC. There'll be a lot of navel gazing in Ulster, and it will be a setback. So they're under massive pressure. Munster season hinges on this, but there is the out that psychologically, if they lose on Friday night, there'll be a lot of weeping and gnashing of teeth for a week or so, and then everyone will start thinking the next season because Graham Rowntree taken over. But I think the context is that Ulster have more to lose in some ways. It's not a lot, but they have more to lose. So I think Ulster have to win this game, have to stay in. They have to they have to extend their season.
Do you think they will?
So I think they probably will at home. Yeah, I think they probably will. I think things are in their favour. Like, I probably get flayed for saying that, but I think it's so important to them not to lose on Friday night. Now, I'm not saying it's not important to Munster. Don't get me wrong. Before people lose their mind on this,
no, but I think it's clear what you mean. Like
it's a must-win scenario for Ulster.
For them. There's more riding on it for them.
Correct. And if Munster lose, they'll be devastated, and there'll be a lot of shrapnel flying next week. I have no doubt about it. But I think people pivot away and say, look, we're resetting the button here. Graham Rountree's taking over, new coaching staff coming in, It's easier to pivot away. If Ulster lose on tomorrow night, where do they pivot? That to me that means that they have to win this game. But it's still a lot at stake. I mean, if Munster lose against Ulster, it'll go down as a very, very average season for Munster. A team that set out their stall at the start of the year about landing silverware. So apart from the only real highlight really is the loss, to Toulouse in the quarter-final. So, you're talking about a loss as your highlight. Frame it like that, and you hate to say that, but that's what you're talking about. So it's an interesting game. I think you can take whatever happened in the ORC between the two of them and tear it up and throw it away. I think it just comes down to tomorrow night, who wants this and who needs it the most. And that's why I think Ulster will nick it. Be very tight. And look, a yellow card, they always say a yellow card at the wrong time, a couple of penalties, a scrum gets on top with the other scrum because the referee reads it that way. It changes the game. But if things go to plan, I think Ulster need this more than Munster at the moment. In fact, I might get criticised for that, but I think if you look where Ulster are sitting today, and if they wake up Saturday morning and their season's over, Jesus, it's a long off season, and where do they turn next?
Fiona, gun to your head, how do you see it going?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a very tight game. I think Munster could just come out on top. I think there's the guys that didn't perform in that Leinster game. There was pressure. There's a lot of pressure on to make some of tours. We looked at Carberry. He probably didn't have his best game against Leinster. The back row were nowhere to be seen at times against Leinster. So I think it's you're looking at guys that are also trying to make a tour in New Zealand. So yes, it's a huge game for the clubs, but we've got guys that want to push on and try and play with Ireland. So I think there's a few guys that want to have a bit of retribution after that game. And I think that maybe Munster might just sneak a win, maybe 2-3 points, but Ulster up in Kingspan is very, very hard to win away.
Yeah, that game is Friday night, and live radio commentary on RTÉ Radio 1 Extra. On Leinster, before we get into the Champions Cup final, we'll just touch on Sean O'Brien, who obviously was announced this afternoon as the replacement for Dennis Leamy as the contact skills coach. And it's funny, Eddie, I mean, you lose a 50-plus cap Ireland international back row from your coaching team, and a couple of hours later you can just bring in another one. If Sean O'Brien is anything close to the coach as he was as a player, he's going to have a pretty good career ahead of him.
Well, no question about that. If he is as close, and I think it's a bit of a surprise that a guy is literally hanging up his boots on a Friday and picking up a whistle the following Monday. It's obviously Leinster are making this decision based on having talked, and there's no reason to doubt he won't be a very good coach because he's gone into his area of expertise. And again, Sean was world-class back row player. Could play across the back row effectively. Again, a bit like Leamy, massively powerful guy, understood the game, has played at the highest level. So yeah, he's the guy with a playing CV. The big question is always for a player is how you make that transition to a coach. It's a different thing. Like the key is is the old thing. Most of these players are really good at what they do, but they're not sure why they're good. They're just very good at it. And they've always been good at it. The trick as a coach is to have to tell people how to do that, So that's his big shit. And it's a brave step to take because, again, Leinster is a big club, a lot of expectations, a lot of pressure. Players will look to him every week to say, all right, Sean, what are we doing here to get better? So he's stepping into a fairly tough business. There's no reason to believe he won't succeed, but he'll have to prove himself. Just because you're a world-class player doesn't mean you're going to be a world-class coach. It's a different ball game altogether. But you wish him well. And again, he's going into an area where he has huge, deep knowledge of. He was in the trenches for long enough. He knows how it works. The question is, can he get his messages across? So it'll be a steep learning curve for him, but no reason he won't succeed if he really wants to do it.
Yeah, and Fiona, like Leinster's track record of hiring coaches would suggest that they probably have seen something in him.
Yeah, they must have, because I thought it was strange as well, because as we said, he's just been playing with London Irish, just decided to retire, but they've worked with him for long enough. They understand, I suppose, how his mind works, and Leo, who's up there with him, has obviously seen something in him as a player, that he's able to get these things from other players around him. So that must be in him already, because I know a lot of player coach that turned coach that took them a while to try and be able to understand how, because they, in their head, as Eddie said, you just know it, and I've seen coaches say, just do it, you just do it. But sometimes players need, step 1, step 2, step 3. So trying to get that knowledge across as a really high class player can be hard at times. But I would imagine he's done it up in training when he's been at Leinster, and I think he's going to be outstanding. And talk about a pressure situation with all the emphasis after the La Rochelle game being on that breakdown, and how things went a little bit wrong around that area. I would imagine he's got his notebook out already, trying to see how he can stop people slowing down that ball.
Yeah, and I suppose that's the neat little segue into the Champions Cup final, because if one man over the last while could probably put his hand up and say he's a decent example of someone who's hung up the boots and gone straight for the whistle, as you said, Eddie, it could be Donnacha Ryan, who made the switch to La Rochelle this season, and things seem to be going all right from their point of view. On the game itself at the weekend, the immediate thought from a lot of people was same again. It was La Rochelle just completely beating Leinster down, physically beating them. In the few days since, when people have been able to review things, is it a bit more sophisticated than that, rather than just they got the better of them physically?
Oh yeah. There's many layers to it. And certainly when you play one of the top teams in France, which La Rochelle are, and obviously really well coached team, know what they're about, know what they want, know what their DNA is. But they're going to be physical, so that's given. And Leinster were always going to probably lose a little bit on the physical stage, but I don't think that was the whole story. Look at going into the game, and La Rochelle isn't the only team that Leinster played, but Leinster led the stats in every department practically in the Heineken Cup. Tries, points, carries, conversions, clean breaks, defenders beaten, meters carried, tackles. The only stats that La Rochelle led the Heineken Cup in was lineouts won, which is basically depends on how often you kick the ball. The other team kicks the ball to touch, so you're not really in control of that. And the other one is they conceded more penalties than anybody, not the one you want. So on any metric, Leinster were the favourites, and they were the favourites. But what happened on the day was La Rochelle did everything that an underdog must do to win a final against the odds, right? So what did they do? No, they started badly. They were under the cosh, but they survived. They stopped Leinster scoring any tries. So who would have gone in and said, you play Leinster for 80 minutes, they won't score a try? This is a team that are just like a try scoring machine. So how did they do that? Well, they did it very smartly. They really contested at ruck time. They really went after the Leinster ruck, which was a smart strategy. And they were in trouble early doors because they were getting pinged by Barnes and a few rucks. And it looked like, geez, they'd better cut themselves on here. But they got smarter. They read Barnes better. They were more aware of when to go for it. And they were smart about doing it. And they slowed down runs for Leinster's ruck ball, which had the immediate effect of taking Leinster out of their rhythm, out of their cadence. So we saw Leinster struggling to find that rhythm that, what Leinster in their rhythm. It's a try is coming. Is it the 5th truck or the 7th truck or the 9th truck? It doesn't matter. They're going to get over the line here. That didn't happen. And the other thing they did is they were very smart. They brought the shooter up and in when they knew Leinster were trying to go wide. So when the Leinster player looked up and tried to make that long pass to the corners to get into those other channels, there was a La Rochelle guy standing in his line of vision, sent him back inside. So defensively, that was massive. To keep Leinster without scoring a try and keep them out of the outside channels. That was the bedrock of the game. And then after that, it's down to fighting and fighting and fighting. No, Rochelle got 3 tries as well. You know, they got their chances, not as many as Leinster, but they took them. But what you do in the bigger picture is, if you're an underdog in a final, you do everything to stay in the game. And you go into the last 10 minutes with a 1-score game, you've done your job. And then it's down to, you know, the rugby gods, whether you get that last chance shot. And they got the last chance shot and they took it. Like, you know, had they knocked on the ball, you know, during those pick and jams, or Leinster got a turnover and they cleared their lines and the final whistle went, there you go, favourites won the game, But Rochelle actually did what they had to do. They stayed in the game, they hung in there, and would, like, literally 5 minutes on the clock, there was a 1-score game. And that's all you can do as an underdog. And then you see, in this last 5 minutes, can we cash in? Can we get a... And they got the field position and they didn't panic, they took it. So it was a kind of a classic case of how an underdog team wins a final against the odds. They take the stuff that the other team are good at and they take it away from them. Like, they stop their quick ruck ball, they keep more of the outside channels, and they hang on and take every chance they get. And La Rochelle got, I think, 3 or 4 chances to score a try, and they got 3 tries. I think the half, just before half time, when they were on the Leinster line, and then Leinster turned them over and went down and got a penalty go off. You know, but in fairness to La Rochelle, they didn't panic. And as Mr. Raj talked about, when they went down to, they went down to 14 men, and you go, look, that's it. In a funny way, Raj reckoned that galvanised them, which again is interesting.
Yeah.
So, you know, the margins were going to be, for La Rochelle to win last weekend, the margins are going to be insanely tight, but they got it done. It was a perfect example of how an underdog team wins a final as an underdog. And that's to me is the big takeaway. It was a brilliant strategy. It was a brilliant game plan. They hung in there. And Leinster, as you see with teams that having their lunch eaten on them, they go into themselves more and more. And Leinster didn't find the rhythm, and then the mistakes start to creep in. The famous mistake where, why didn't Johnny kick the ball to touch instead of trying to take that step? You know, why didn't Hugo Keenan kick? You know, you saw then when, and I don't know why they took Johnny off, because, you know, no disrespect.
I do think on that it was definitely, there was definitely an ankle injury playing its part in that. I would say
I accept that.
But awkwardly after that incident where he probably should have kicked, and he got caught up himself and he hurt.
And I accept that, but my point is that I would really need him to have to be dysfunctional to take him off, because he's so important to him. In those last minutes, someone of his experience, and it's not. It's no disrespect to Byrne coming on. He comes on, he kicked the penalty, but he panicked a bit as well in that last quarter or the last few minutes when they needed him. And I just thought, look, that's playing Monday quarterback, and I should never do it. Nobody should do it. But I can see where they may take him off. But I thought once Johnny went off, I had another moment where I go, La Rochelle are going to be happy about this, you know. Yeah. For whatever reason, he went off. So, look, long story short, La Rochelle played the perfect game as underdogs to win a final. And if they played Leinster next week, would you back Leinster to lose it? I don't know. I think Leinster probably win if they played again, but it doesn't matter. It's a final. It's a one-off. And you credit to Raj for getting so many things right on the day. And they still might have lost it, you know. But even if La Rochelle lost, I would have said he couldn't have done any more than he did, you know, to stay in the game. And then they got the break they needed to win the game in the 80th minute. Like, the game was over. So it's the perfect game plan, the perfect execution, and the perfect outcome. So hats off to Raj for that. But Leinster will kick themselves because they let themselves get put into that position. They didn't adapt their game. They didn't adapt what was happening around them. And they panicked a little bit. No one in particular, but everybody in general went out of their game, out of their comfort zone, and didn't get the game by the scruff of the neck. And there it is. There's a Champions Cup gone down to Swanee. There's the 5th star gone. Start again next year. It's a tough one to swallow.
On the discipline, which you mentioned there, like all 21 points of Leinster's total came from penalties. One thing I was kind of wondering afterwards, and you mentioned that, like, the high penalty count, particularly in the first half, is it purely a coincidence that, like, of the 6 penalties Johnny Sexton kicked, all 6 were at various lengths out, but they were all directly in front of the sticks? And you spoke about how La Rochelle went in particularly aggressive at the breakdown. It was offside as well that they were caught on as well a few times in midfield. would a team, for example, if you were taking on a side who were a try-scoring machine, would it ever be conceivable from a coaching point of view to say to your players, if you want to try creep on offside, try steal that extra half yard, do it in the center of the pitch. If you want to go really, really aggressive on the ball, do it in the center of the pitch. Try not to do those things out towards a touchline, because the temptation is always going to be there if you're straight in front of the sticks in a final to tap these over for a penalty rather than pumping them to the corner. Is that completely galaxy braining things? Is it overcomplicating it from my point of view, or is there something in that?
Yeah, you are overcomplicating.
Okay. I was thinking.
I think you don't want to give away penalties anywhere.
Straight in front of the post.
You don't want to give. I sense that. I mean, Johnny could have kicked some of those penalties that he put to the corner. I just think Leinster were feeling the mood, and I think Leinster would say if they'd got enough. Like playing a French team, as well as psychology. If Leinster got enough space between them, and you could say arguably they had enough space between them and La Rochelle, but they didn't quite get away from them. But they could have got away from, maybe more than 2 scores. La Rochelle would have probably said it's not our day. So there was a bit of that thinking. And to be fair, Leinster do convert a lot of those opportunities they put into the corner. They have a good line-out. They have good ball retention. And usually the ones you put into the corner, if you hold on to the ball, you get an easier penalty to kick 2 or 3 minutes later, from the lineup. So no, I don't think there was any major strategy or when they gave them up and when they didn't. Like La Rochelle have sailed very close to the win on the weekend. One more penalty would have probably done it from Leinster. So they were there, but that's what they were doing. La Rochelle, they were playing right on the edge, which you have to if you're the underdog. And it worked out from. I bet you Rod just tearing his hair if you done some of the penalties they did give away because it could have cost them the game. But look, it just worked out perfectly for La Rochelle, not by accident, but by design, which is to me is the great thing for them.
And specifically on that, you say it wasn't by accident, it was by design. And one thing,
absolutely, 100%, yeah.
One thing, Fiona, that Raj said in the post-match press conference, and he said they had really, really looked into into Leinster's games this season, particularly in the latter half of this season. And he said the one thing they had isolated was where Leinster were most vulnerable were the last 20 minutes of the game. And that was that just really jumped out when he said it, because if you think about it, it was 18-10 pretty much heading into those final 20 minutes. And that's when La Rochelle struck. That's when they could have been maybe a little bit closer to Leinster had it not been for discipline, but that's when they got those last 2 tries, and that's when they really had them on the ropes.
Yeah, and that's it. I think he said they came in at half time and they were all moping around the place because they were losing. But, I think Treacy was saying it was stats he used, instead of emotion, it was stats he used when talking to his team, and that Leinster more likely score in the first 20 minutes of the game and La Rochelle more likely score in the last 20 minutes of the game. So if you can say this to these guys who are tired and say we are within 2 tries, we know we're well able to do this. He also probably brought in the point, these guys don't even want to attack us. They're happy taking their points. So it was almost like it was meant to be, because I hadn't seen a Leinster team play that way. You're looking at a massive pack in front of you and you're thinking, why are you not moving these guys around? Why are you giving them a minute and a half to relax and take your kick, and everyone gets to take a few breathers, the big front rows get their time and they come at you again? So it was just interesting that hats off to La Rochelle and Raj, the way he attacked it. It was brilliant. Eddie spoke about defensively, he looked at that. We saw how they slowed down the ruck, but something that really jumped out to me was when I was looking at the stats from the game, because you watch a game but sometimes you miss a lot of things, and the whole pack and the sub pack that came on, between them all they only had 15 carries, which is very, very unusual for a Leinster pack. You're looking at La Rochelle, the guys that came off the bench offered 7 carries, so they had 30 altogether. So it was almost like they were shell-shocked, this Leinster team. They didn't want to carry. They might have been a little bit tired, and that's credit to La Rochelle defence. But they knew they had the backing, they had the belief that if they stuck in there, and you almost felt like as it was getting towards the last 12 minutes, you felt like they were going to get up that pitch and to have the concentration levels. I've never seen a French team have those 12 minutes of out and out concentration. They were so clinical. There was no errors. It was the Leinster team that was making the errors. And that to me is something that a coach has installed in this team. They wanted to win it, and he installed that confidence in them. And it was brilliant to see.
Yeah, that last 10, 12 minutes in particular, Eddie, like, was really fascinating to see, because I marked it down. I think it was Sunday morning. I was looking back at it. It was around 78 minutes, 40 seconds. Leinster conceded a penalty, and the final 11 minutes and 20 seconds of the match were played exclusively within 10 meters of Leinster's try line, and they did not touch the ball once.
Well, if you watch rugby in general, and you find, I've seen this over and over and over again, no matter how good one team is or how bad the other team is, if the team is within one score of you with 10 minutes left, they will get a shot. It's just how the rugby gods seem to work, is you get a shot. And La Rochelle knew, if they must have known, if they stayed within striking distance of Leinster, they'd get a shot. And when they all knew, La Rochelle knew that this was it when they got into that zone. And if they let Leinster off the hook there, they might not get back in again. So there was an element of concentration that meant that they knew every carry could be the last carry, every ruck could be the last ruck. So there was no room for error. So they showed incredible. Now, the other thing there is, I think that maybe, again, you've got to see is that Leinster would have probably fancied themselves as being a little bit, we had a lot of talk about ball and play time, from the previous from the semi-finals, and how we've the ball and play more in the URC than we have in the top 14, and that La Rochelle wouldn't be able to live with Leinster in the last quarter. I didn't see any slowing down of the game, really. I mean, like, La Rochelle were right up there with Leinster, to be fair, and that goes down to their strength and conditioning. That they were able to, as Fiona said, bring that intensity and execution. Because the one thing that does you in the last 10 minutes is not your will to fight, it's your fatigue. That ball goes to ground or something, or if somebody flops at a ruck and gives away a penalty instead of extending their feet. So they kept that level of intensity, and I just felt, I had a sinking feeling, like, if I was a Leinster fan, that once it got into the last 5 minutes and there was a 4-point spread, that's a horrible lead to have, 4 points.
Can I ask a stupid question at this point? And I'm not really saying could Leinster have done it, because you'd be kind of daft to do it in a final. What I would be wondering is, could we see a point in the next few years where some coach decides, some absolute maverick lunatic coach decides that we're 3 or 4 point, we're 4 or 5 points up in the final few minutes. We haven't touched the ball in the last 5-6 minutes. We're defending our own line. We are conceding penalty after penalty after penalty. Could you potentially see a coach trying to, take a leaf out of an NFL head coach's playbook and say, do you know what? Let's let them in for a score, take our chances and get our hands back on the ball, and we'd have a shot to win the game. I'm not saying Leinster should have done it at the weekend, talking cup final rugby, but I was a little bit curious as to, could we actually see this happen someday? And if it does work out, my God, that coach will be hailed as a genius.
Well, if you do that, it better work out, or you're going to work. The difference in between the NFL and rugby is, the key difference is that you are guaranteed to get the ball back in the NFL. Yeah. So if Leinster give up a try, they'll give the ball back to La Rochelle, and how are you going to get the ball back? So there's that consideration, which in the NFL, if you let in the touchdown, I've seen games in the NFL where a player has been running in for a touchdown and taking a knee, so that they get the first down and they run the clock out. So they're all, but it's possible that we'll have more strategic thinking around the end game, which you see in basketball and NFL all the time. And now that the clock is down to the last second, which you didn't have before. If you think about years ago, the referee decided how much extra time there was, and they blew the whistle whenever they wanted. But it's a possibility. But I think that's more something down the line. And I don't see any coach at the moment making that decision. But the other thing I would mention there is that I thought Leinster were lucky in the end game there. Not that it made any difference in the end, but had Leinster hung on, the big question would have been is why they weren't yellow carded.
Yeah.
because they were in yellow. They were definitely in yellow card territory.
They gave away 5 penalties and a further penalty advantage during that spell.
Yeah, if the shoe was on the other foot, if that was an Irish team pounding a French team's goal line, and they didn't get a card, we'd be all jumping up and down. But in fairness, La Rochelle it didn't matter in the end because they got the win. But if La Rochelle had for some reason got turned over, they didn't score, you would have said, well, hold on a minute, 5 penalties on your own goal line in the last 5 minutes. How is that not a yellow card? Now, in fairness, I thought Barnes had a really good game, but I thought he was backing out of that one there because he knew that if a yellow card there, that was curtains, like at that level, it'd be impossible to hold out. So he didn't want that responsibility. So lucky for Barnes, La Rochelle scored.
And just with that, Neil, as well, remember in NFL you get to send on a whole nother team to attack different than defense. So they've had their rest and they're ready to go.
I want to see it happen. I desperately want to see it happen. Before we finish up, guys, I do want to kind of we touched on him there earlier on, but for Ronan O'Gara and the scale of his achievement at this stage, like Fiona, he's at a point now where it's really going to be fascinating in the next few seasons to see what he does with his career. He has 1 year left on his current deal at La Rochelle. I would imagine their director general is, absolutely baiting down his door to get him to sign a new contract. And particularly a year out from a World Cup, it's going to be really, really interesting to see what sort of move he makes, or does he even make a move?
Yeah, I know it's so riveting. It's crazy when you start hearing talks that England are looking for Ronan O'Gara as well. I've heard a few different people telling me that would be quite upsetting, I think, for us if we lost him to England. But look, there's so much choice there. He's done it all. He done it over the Crusaders. He's been unreal at Racing. Then he's moved to, a lot of people would have said John O'Gibbs, but we saw Rog take the step up. He took over and he's gone one step further and won this. So he offers a lot. He's a great character. He Donica right in with him, and you saw the influence of both of them. So it's funny. I would imagine looking at his CV, he's going to want to move on somewhere else. He seems to want to get involved in a few different things, whether his end game is coming back to Ireland. Maybe he could want to coach France someday. You just don't know. As a coach, you want to be coaching at the top level. You look at the likes of Leo Cullen. He's had Leinster for so long, but Raj seems to be learning different styles rugby, learning his trade, and hopefully we will see him back. Personally at Munster, I'd love to see it someday. But even with Ireland, so I think the sky's the limit for him at the minute, and his rugby CV is absolutely through the roof already at such a young age.
Final word for you, Eddie. What would your advice to him be as a former Test coach?
Well, he's doing nothing at the moment. Just get on with his job. He's I think the major achievement from and we talk about being in the Crusaders and being in Racing. They were all assistant coaches positions. So this is his first rodeo as a head coach. So to me, that's an extraordinary achievement in your first season as head coach to achieve what he's achieved and built on what was built on the previous year, So he's really kind of announced himself now to World Rugby as a bona fide head coach at the highest level. So there'll be no shortage of offers from. I mean, it depends up to himself. I mean, La Rochelle isn't the worst place in the world to live, It's a really nice place, and he's a local hero now. So I think La Rochelle will try and hold on to him. But look, it's up to his own ambitions. I suspicion as well he would probably like to coach Ireland at some point. Now, the thing about coaching your country is it tends to happen in cycles, 4-year cycles, so that if he wanted to coach Ireland in the shorter term, he'd have to put his hat in the ring after before the end of the next World Cup. Does that fit with his plans? Particularly if he's young family, does he want his family to go up in France? There's all those considerations. But if he doesn't do that, then you're talking about 2027, and what happens between now and 2027, you don't know. So there's a lot of moving parts again there, but I would say for him, the ball's in everybody else's court now when it comes to Rog. He's proven himself. So he just sits back, enjoys his time in La Rochelle, and they want to win a top 14 championship. That's another on the bucket list there. Will it happen this year? I don't know. But you think they've got the wherewithal to get it done. If not this year, maybe the next year after that. So yeah, the world's his oyster, and delighted for him because he has taken risks in his career. Let's be fair.
La Rochelle was a risk in and of itself.
Oh, absolutely. He took risks. He just went straight into as a kicking coach into Racing. Then he went off to New Zealand. It was a big risk of going to New Zealand, like that's where if you're going to get found out, you get found out in New Zealand as the coach. And then he comes back and he takes Rochelle on and he digs in there and he does a great job. And then he's taken risks in his career, which means himself, he's got a good attitude. He's hungry. He wants to learn, as Fiona was saying, but he wants to drive himself on. No different than when he was a player. So no surprises there. So yeah, he's got a phenomenal career in front of him. Where it'll take him, I don't know. But yeah, I hopefully at some point it'll be back on Irish soil.
Yeah, let's see how things go over the next few years. Eddie and Fiona, thanks a million for joining us on this week's RTÉ Rugby podcast. Rugby coming up on RTÉ this weekend. Ulster and Munster live radio commentary in the URC this Friday evening on RTÉ Radio 1 Extra. And then the other quarter-final this week involving the Irish teams, Leinster against Glasgow Warriors at the RDS, is live on RTÉ 1 this Saturday, 2:45 p.m. on air, 3:15 kickoff. And there'll also be radio updates on that on Saturday Sport on RTÉ Radio 1. Thanks a million, guys, and we'll see you again next week.
Cheers, lads.
Cheers. Bye.
See you later. Thanks a million, Neil. Bye, Eddie.
The RTÉ Rugby podcast, sponsored by Canterbury. See the new Irish men and women's rugby jerseys at canterbury.com.